Hello everyone, how are you all? Hope you all are doing well. So we were doing what marathon revision of what tax invoice, debit and credit note. Very simple chapter. If question comes from this chapter, we have to grab those marks. So now first of all, in case of goods, the invoice is issued in triplicate. You remember, original for the recipient, duplicate for the transporter and triplicate for the supplier. Original copy is for the recipient, he has to take ITC from that. And in case of services, only two copies are there. What? Original for the recipient and duplicate for the supplier. No transporter in case of service, because okay. Then the serial number of invoice which are issued during the month or quarter will be furnished in what? GSTR1, in form GSTR1. Then types of invoice. First is tax invoice. Tax invoice. Who issues the tax invoice? Tax invoice is to be issued by the registered person who is making what? Supply of taxable goods and services. Supply of taxable goods and services. He has to issue what? Tax invoice. Then the person who is doing what? Who is making exempt supply, or who is a composite dealer, has to issue a document which is called as bill of supply. Then there is one document which is called as invoice cum bill of supply. Which is to be issued by the person who is making taxable as well as exempt supply. Who is doing taxable as well as exempt supply, he has to issue a document which is called as invoice cum bill of supply. Next is receipt voucher. Okay, so in case of receipt voucher, if you are a supplier, you are doing what? You are getting advance payment from the recipient. Then a document which we are going to issue to the recipient is called as receipt voucher. Okay, so you are a supplier. You are a supplier. What you have done? Advance payment has been received from the recipient. Then in that case, receipt voucher is to be issued. Any document has to be issued under GST. Okay, so many times it happens in the normal business transactions that advance has been received. So whenever the advance has been received, in that case the document which you have to issue is receipt voucher. Where at the time of receipt of advance, either the rate of tax or the nature of supply is not determinable. Either you don't know the rate of tax or you don't know the nature of supply. In that case, if the rate of tax is not determinable, then the tax will be levied at the rate of 18%. If the rate of tax is not determinable, it will be levied at 18%. And if the nature of supply is not determinable, then it will always be treated as interstate supply. Okay. Next, now you have received the advance. At the time of receipt of advance, you know what we issue? Receipt voucher. Now there is no supply due to any reason the transaction supply could not take place. Then in that case, obviously you will refund the amount to the recipient. At that time of the refund, you have to issue a document which is called as refund voucher. Now there is a concept of consolidated tax invoice. What is consolidated tax invoice? It will be issued for supply at the close of each day in respect of all such supplies. Okay, at the close of each day, you have to issue a document which is called as consolidated tax invoice. Tax invoice is not required to be issued where the value of supply is less than 200. When you will not issue the tax invoice, tax invoice is not required to be issued where the value of supply is less than 200, or the recipient is unregistered, or the recipient does not require such invoice, So if these three conditions are satisfied at the close of each day, which document you will issue? Consolidated tax invoice. What all points? When the value of supply is less than 200, the recipient is unregistered, and the recipient does not require the invoice. So if these three conditions are satisfied, in that case what will happen? Consolidated tax invoice will be issued at the close of each day. Okay, I hope it is clear. Next is revised tax invoice. For which intervening period we issue? From effective date of registration till the date of issuance of registration certificate. For example, you become liable for registration on say 10th of November. You apply for registration on 15 November. Okay, and registration certificate is granted to you on 25th November. So during this intervening period, that is from 10th of November till 25th November, you are doing the business, you are making the supplies, but you are not issuing the tax invoice because you are not registered till that. Definitely now registration certificate has been granted to you effective from 10th of November. So from 10th of November till 25th of November, After the issue of registration certificate, for this period you will issue revised tax invoice of all the invoices which you have issued between 10 November from 10 November till 25th November, charging tax on it. Okay, so this is called as revised tax invoice. Now next is credit note. In what situations credit note is issued? Many a times in exam they'll ask you. There are 4 situations when credit note is issued. Okay, so when one or more tax invoice has been issued for supply of goods or services where the taxable value in the invoice is greater than the taxable value in respect of such invoice, tax charge in the invoice is greater than the tax in respect of such supply, or where the goods or supplied are returned by the recipient, or where the goods or services are found to be deficient. In these four cases, you will issue a document which will call as credit note. So when one or more tax invoice has been issued, you will issue one or more credit note for this. You will issue a one or more credit note for this. Okay. In 4 scenarios, you will issue the what? Credit note when the taxable value in the invoice is greater than the tax in respect of such supply. For example, the taxable value in the invoice you have charged 1 lakh rupees taxable value. However, the taxable value should be 90,000, or you have charged the tax as 10,000. However, the tax should be 9,000. So for 1,000 difference, you will issue a document which will call as credit note. So 4 situations where the credit note is issued is where taxable value is greater than the what taxable value it should be, where the tax charge is greater than the what tax payable it should be, where the goods or services are returned, or where these are found to be deficient. In all these cases, a document which will be issued is called as credit note, Then there is a concept of debit note. What is that? Where the tax invoice has been issued for supply of any goods or services. Where the tax invoice has been issued, and where the taxable value in the invoice is less than the taxable value in respect of such supply, or where the tax charge in the invoice is less than tax payable in respect of such supply. That means where the taxable value is say 1 lakh rupees. The taxable value is say 1 lakh rupees. The taxable value in the invoice is 1 lakh. But the taxable value in respect of such supply is 1,10,000, or the tax charge is 10,000 in the invoice, but it should be 11,000. So for this 1,000 differential amount, you will issue a debit note, a document which will be called as debit note. So against one or more debit note, one or more tax invoice, you can issue one or more debit notes, not a problem. Now, in these 4 electronic documents, signature or digital signature of the supplier is not required. What are those 4 documents? Electronic tax invoice, electronic bill of supply, electronic consolidated tax invoice in case of banking company, and electronic ticket for passenger transport service. So in these 4 cases, the signature or digital signature of supplier or authorized representative is not required. Then number of HSN digit required in tax invoice and class of registered person not required to mention HSN. So it will depend upon your turnover. Okay. If the turnover is less than or equal to 5 CR, then in case of B2B supply, only 4 digit HSN is required. In case of B2C supply, 4 digits HSN, but it is again optional. Okay, so if your aggregate turnover is less than or equal to 5 CR, then you have to see if you are making B2B supply, then compulsorily 4 digit HSN. In case of B2B supply, then 4 digit HSN only, that is optional. And in case aggregate turnover is greater than 5 crores, then in B2B and B2C, in both the cases, the number of HSN is 6 digit. Okay. Now next, special provision pertaining to tax invoice for service by way of admission to exhibition of cinematic film in a multiplex screen. So in case of multiplex screen, option to issue consolidated invoice has been disallowed. They are required to issue what? They are required to issue a electronic ticket, and that will be deemed to be tax invoice. And if such ticket does not contains detail of recipient but contains other information, that is also okay. Now, supplier of service in a screen other than multiplex screen has also been given the same option to follow the above procedure. So they will be deemed what? They are required to issue an electronic ticket that will be deemed to be tax invoice. Now next is the concept of e-invoicing. What is this? You are a registered person whose aggregate turnover, in any preceding financial year from 17-18 onwards, exceeds 5 crores. Then you will prepare an e-invoice in respect of B2B supplies and for exports So what is that? In respect of you're a registered person whose aggregate turnover in any preceding financial year from 17-18 onwards, like in 17-18, 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, 21, 22, 22-23, any year your aggregate turnover exceeds 5 crore rupees. 5 crores rupees. So you are required to prepare what? You are required to prepare e-invoice in respect of B2B supplies as well as for exports. In respect of B2B supply as well as for exports, you are not required to report what B2C invoices. So if your aggregate turnover in any preceding financial year from 17-18 onwards exceeds 5 crores, you are required to issue what? E-invoice for B2B supplies and for exports, not required for B2C supply. Also, e-invoicing is not applicable to invoice issued by ISD. The invoice which ISD issuing, then this e-invoicing is not applicable for invoice issued by ISD. Now, if invoice is issued by a notified person, who is issuing the invoice? Notified person. In respect of supply made by him, the tax on which is payable under reverse charge, e-invoicing is applicable. So now what is this? We'll see. So now, if the invoice is issued by a notified person, who is issuing the invoice? Notified person. That in respect of supply made by him, the tax on which is payable under reverse charge, e-invoicing is applicable. So for example, you are a lawyer, taxpayer, you are an advocate, okay. Now you all know, in case of advocate, if it is provided to business entity, tax on which is payable by the business entity under RCM, who will pay the tax? Business entity under RCM. This we all know, okay. Now, advocate's turnover is say 15 crores rupees, 15 crores rupees. So he is a notified person. Who will issue the e-invoice? Advocate, not the business entity. Even though tax will be payable by business entity under RCM, but who is required to issue invoice? Who is required to issue e-invoice? E-invoice is to be issued by the person. E-invoice is to be issued by the person who is what? Here, who is a notified person. Who is a notified person? Whose aggregate turnover is more than 5 CR. Whose aggregate turnover is more than 5 CR? In this case, advocates. So, advocate is required to issue e-invoice. Advocate is required to issue e-invoice. However, tax will be payable by business entity under RCM. Business entity under RCM. Now, where specified category of supply are received by notified person. Now, specified category of supply are received by the notified person from unregistered person attracting RCM or through import of services, e-invoice does not arise or does not applicable. Now, you are what? Specified category of suppliers are received by notified person from an unregistered person. So now you are a specified class of registered person. You are receiving supplies from unregistered person. Unregistered person. The RCM is required to be paid. The tax is required to be paid by you under RCM under 9(4). However, e-invoicing is not applicable. Why is e-invoicing not applicable? Because this is your inward supply, not your outward supply. Okay. So on this you are required to pay tax. For example, your turnover is say 7 crores. Your turnover is 7 crores. So in this case, you are not required to issue e-invoice for this, the things which you are purchasing from the unregistered person. Why? Because it is your inward supply. On your outward supply, you will issue the e-invoice. But on this inward supply, you are not required to issue e-invoice. Okay. You will also pay tax under RCM in this case, but for this e-invoicing is not applicable. Also, if you are importing the services, okay. Now your turnover is say 15 crores, you are importing the services. You will pay the tax under RCM, but that is your inward supply. You are not required to issue e-invoice. Okay, so e-invoice is applicable only for your outward supply. I hope it is clear. Now, next, exemption from e-invoicing. Exemption from e-invoicing. Which entities are not required to issue e-invoice? Which entities are not required to issue invoice? So the following entities are exempt from mandatory issuing of e-invoice. What? First is SCZ unit or developer. SCZ unit, not developer. Okay, mind my words, SCZ unit and not developer. So these entities are exempt from e-invoicing. First is SCZ unit. SCZ unit is not required to issue e-invoice. These entities are exempt from e-invoicing. So SCZ units are not required to issue e-invoice even if their aggregate turnover exceeds 5 crore. Those whose aggregate turnover is less than 5 crore anyway is not required to issue e-invoice. But even if their aggregate turnover exceeds 5 crores, then also they are not required to issue e-invoice. First is SEZ unit. Second is insurer, banking company or financial institute including NBFC, not required to issue e-invoice. Then GTA supplying service in relation to transportation of goods by road in a goods carriage, not required to issue e-invoice. Then supplier of passenger transport service, not required to issue e-invoice. Person supplying service by way of admission to exhibition of cinematographic film in multiplex screen, not required to issue e-invoice. Then the government department and local authority. Okay, so these are the persons who are not required to issue e-invoice. They are required to provide a declaration. They have to give definitely on the tax invoice stating that their aggregate turnover exceeds the notified aggregate turnover, and they are not required to prepare an e-invoice. That declaration they have to give. Okay, so these persons are not required to issue the e-invoice. These 6 persons, who are those people: SEZ unit, insurer, banking company, financial institute including NBFC, GTA supplying service in relation to transportation of goods, then supplier of passenger transport service, then person supplying service by way of admission to exhibition of cinematographic film, and a government department and local authority. These people are not required to issue e-invoice. These person are not required to issue e-invoice. Now there are two clarifications. One is, it is clarified that the exemption from generation of e-invoice is for entity as a whole and not restricted by nature of supply. So this has come, they have given an example, for example the banking company. So whatever services they are providing, whatever anything whatever they provide, they are not required to issue e-invoice. So this exemption is for banking company and not by the nature of service, that particular service is exempt from e-invoice. It's not like this. If banking company is exempt, the entity as a whole is exempt from issue of e-invoicing. Next, the registered person whose turnover exceed the limit for generation of e-invoice is required to issue invoice for supply made to such government department, establishment, agencies and PSU who are required to deduct TCS. Now you are supplying to government, department and all. So in this case you are required to issue invoice. Who is exempt from e-invoicing? Government department, local authority is exempt. But if you are supplying to government department, you are a notified person, your aggregate turnover is more than 5 crore, are you required to issue tax invoice? Yes, obviously you are required. Okay, so there was a confusion in industry, so government come up with this clarification. So if there is some person, supplier who is a notified person, means whose aggregate turnover is more than 5 crore, he is required to issue e-invoice if he is supplying to the government. But this exemption is for government department and local authority. Okay. Now, how is e-invoice generated? So, first the taxpayer prepare invoice. You will prepare invoice your own using your accounting, ERP, billing system, whatever manual system. You will make your invoice from your own system first. Then your invoice must conform to e-invoice schema. That is what standard format. So, whatever fields are there in e-invoice schema, that should be there in your invoice also. The details of invoice, now you have prepared an invoice. Now the details of the invoice will be uploaded, reported by taxpayer to invoice registration portal. So these invoice registration portal, these all we will see, invoice1.gst.gov.in and so on. So on these portal you will upload or report what the details of the invoice. This way the taxpayer register his supply on an IRP. So now you have registered your supply. On uploading the IRP, returns e-invoice with a unique invoice reference number. The invoice registration portal will give you a reference number after digitally signing it, and they will add a QR code on your invoice, Then this supplier will share the invoice with the receiver. You will share this invoice with a QR code. Okay. Now, what are the invoice registration portal? This is a website where we will report the invoices. The notified person will upload. These are the website: www.einvoice1.gst.gov.in, www.einvoice2.gst.gov.in, and so on till 10. Okay, so these are what the invoice registration portal. What are the important contents of the tax invoice? Now, what is important is the important contents of the tax invoice. So there is no format prescribed for the tax invoice, but there's no format for the tax invoice, but there are contents they have given you, that these contents should be in the tax invoice. Whatever the format you want, you can choose, but these should be there in the tax invoice. These are very simple. If at all they ask you in the exam, probability is low, but this is you can fetch a very good marks in this. So just remember, you must have seen many invoices. You all must have purchased mobile phones. So you remember, you check that invoice. Okay. So what all details are there in the invoice? Just think: name, address, GSTIN of the supplier, supplier's name, address, GST, and then consecutive serial number not exceeding what 16 characters. There would be a serial number in the invoice not exceeding 16 characters. In one series it could be, in multiple series it could be alphabets, numbers, special characters, hyphen, dash, slash or any combination unique for a financial year. Then date of its issue, what is the date of its issue. Then if the recipient is registered, the name, address, GST and UIN of the recipient. Name, address, GSTN or UIN of the recipient. If the recipient is unregistered, and value of supply is 50,000 or more, and value of supply is 50,000 and more, then in that case name, address of the recipient and address of delivery along with the name of the state and its code. So here if the recipient is registered, then name, address, GSTN of the recipient. If recipient is unregistered and value of supply is 50,000 or more, and value of supply is 50,000 or more. Okay, so recipient is registered, obviously he has to take the credit, then his name, address, GSTN or UIN. But if recipient is non-registered, then you have to see the value. Value is 50,000 or more, then name, address and of the recipient and address of delivery along with the name of the state and its code. But if it is less than 50,000, then unregistered recipient may still request the aforesaid details to be recorded in the invoice. Then in case supply of online money gaming, or where the taxable service is supplied by or through ECO or by supplier of OIDR service to a recipient who is unregistered, irrespective of value of supply, a tax invoice issued by the registered person will contain name of the state of recipient and shall be deemed to be the address of the recipient on record of the recipient. So now in these three cases, first is online money gaming, second if supplied through ECO, third supplier of OIDR services. So in these cases, irrespective of value, even if the value is 2500, say, that in that case tax invoice issued shall contain the name of the state. The name of the state is important of the recipient and that will be deemed to be the address. Then what is required in the invoice? Very simple, HSN code for goods or services, description would be there, quantity would be there, value will be there, total value, taxable value of goods or services would be there, rate of tax, that is of central tax, state tax, integrated tax, union territory tax, then amount of tax charge in respect of goods or services, then place of supply along with the name of the state in case supply, in case of interstate, then address of delivery where the same is different from place of supply, then where the tax is payable on reverse charge basis, then signature or digital signature of supplier and authorized representative, then QR code having embedded IRN in that in case e-invoice has been issued. So all these things, these are what the contents of tax invoice. So again, there is no format prescribed, but rules make it mandatory to have these contents in the tax invoice. Okay, so you have to just read it in exam at all come, you remember any tax invoice and you have to write these points. Okay, so this was a very simple chapter. Don't please leave marks in this chapter. Okay, and we'll stop a discussion over here for this chapter. Thank you for now.